Let's set the scene here. It's about early 2008, and after having suffered a bit through MapleStory, I end up browsing image boards and notice a few certain images popping up. Things like this, and this. When said image board inevitably cried, "Sauce!" the answer was always the same. A Korean MMO that was part fantasy dungeon crawler and part life sim. I was intrigued for far more than those two reasons. Then suddenly I was informed that the game was to be making its way to the States. And who might be the elite publisher that would handle this title? The answer was in front of me the whole time. Da-da-da-da! Nexon! Yes, the publisher that gleefully allowed the terrible fanbase of MapleStory to run so rampant and infected their other games. The company that was overly fond of nickel and diming you for every basic gameplay feature was to be publishing this. Not only that, the developer, DevCat, is actually a subsidiary of Nexon, so technically, this is entirely a Nexon game. I've played it before. I had no idea what I was doing, but the more I looked at it, the more Nexonian it began to feel, and I stopped. But thanks to a raid leader suggestion from Patreon, I am finally giving this a fair shake. This is the MMO Grinder, and it's time to look at Mabinogi. Mabinogi is a beloved, but obviously dated, 3D fantasy sandbox MMO that takes place in the world of Erin, a very anime-styled, Korean-influenced world that's extremely fond of Celtic mythology and Celtic names. Just wait until I start massacring names like Tirchinel, Fjord, Sid Snitchta, Sid... Glass Goblin? Oh, that's Evan in Morrigan. I know how to say those. Let's just say that Gaelic speakers and plastic patties alike are going to have a field day picking apart my pronunciations with this one. I covered most of this already, but here we go again. The game was published in North America in 2008 by Nexon. I did play it around the US launch, and despite not getting into it, it's still something that's always intrigued me, and I have made several allusions to the game in various videos, like DC Woe, Vindictus, and SMT Imagine. Since then, it's managed to hold on to a very dedicated following. So dedicated, in fact, that Mabinogi was a suggestion I've been receiving since day one. Even as recently as a few days ago, I'd received a message on YouTube asking me when I was going to look at it. My original answer was never, since the last time I gave any solace to an old title with a long-standing dedicated fanbase, it just worked out so well. However, Patreon reward tiers were created for a reason, and when someone willing to support my show at such a level says I should look at the title, I'm looking at it. So, thank you to Trigger, who's apparently really well known among the community of Mabinogi, for helping me to make some sense out of this thing, and actually start to enjoy it. Let us begin. Mabinogi got its start in 2004, and boy does that show. The graphics, while crisp, are clearly and understandably dated, with heavily polygonal character models and enemies. You can also tell when certain items were added to the game, because some outfits look very low-res and simplistic, while others have very interesting details and textures. It's definitely a game that's been tweaked since its inception, just without the engine being changed. The environments also fall prey to this, most of them being simple textures to represent grass or rock, and others looking shockingly detailed, like the reflective marble flooring in some areas. There's a fairly common effect during sunny days in the game, where the sun will actually brighten up the screen when the camera is facing it, washing out the color and causing me to squint at all the brightness. As interesting as the effect is, I find it rather annoying, but I don't recall many other games trying to do something like that. Make no mistake, visuals aside, this is very much a game of swords and fantasy, until someone in the marketing department realized that the game might be possibly considered, how do I put this again?
Super kawaii!
And no, it's not just because of the cute animals and very anime-looking faces. They are going full stop into trying to bring this title to the Otakon crowd. The US and Japan recently added a ninja class to the storyline featuring a fox boy and a raccoon girl, character types that, up until this point, did not exist. The most recent patch as I play this somehow ties the game into the anime Sword Art Online, which is something you'd think I'd have seen by now. Other tie-ins included an overseas exclusive event centering around Full Metal Alchemist to promote the Alchemist skill set, and there was another event a while back that heavily featured Vocaloids. The SAO thing is here because Ugu Kawaii Sugoi. This is very much to the dismay of players like Trigger, as the game was, up until these points, fairly serious in its story and tone. The final nail being the Saga quests, which try to turn questing into an episodic anime serial. No, really. They've even gone as far as changing the nearly decade-old slogan from "Your fantasy life" to "Your anime life." One final act of frustration comes from the interface, which, despite constantly evolving, can pop up with things at the worst times. I've had plenty of interesting cutscenes partially obscured by a pointless text block that I wasn't able to close in time, and worse still, blocking my ability to target an attack in a game based entirely around click-to-move controls. It will take a bit of patience. It's kinda hard for me to judge this soundtrack. It's something that screams its age, with some tracks that sound wonderfully composed with interesting instrumental choices, but other tracks sounding painfully dated and overly synthesized. Some tracks, and many in dungeons in fact, can get very repetitive as they loop often and rarely change up unless you enter a new floor or a boss battle. This game can also be quite the fan of silence as well. Sound design is okay, nothing really all that special. Attacks, hits, and other things sound perfectly fine. My only real issue comes from the fact that the sound effects are the same regardless of where they came from, be it party members, yourself, or your enemies. There's been many times I've heard the sound of a successful attack, only to later find out it wasn't my attack that was successful. As calculated as the combat in the game is, it is a bit of a hindrance. While I could easily tell you that this is a game where providing your own soundtrack isn't a detriment, in fact, a lot of my playtime was being overlaid by podcasts and videos I was just catching up on, there's a way to get your own custom soundtrack that might just be easier than opening up a music player and hitting shuffle. You can technically provide your own soundtrack for the game, as the music files are not compressed into any format. All you need to do is to switch up the song file that you want, and make sure you rename the new file with the exact name of the old file. It's not unheard of to find community-created custom soundtracks for this game. Well, starting out, you can probably guess what's coming if you're familiar with any other Nexon title I reviewed. The web launcher. Nexon titles are oddly insistent on having you launch the game through a web page with most of the desktop links leading you to said web page. If you're savvy enough to dig into the files to start up the launcher directly, you'd think you might have found a workaround, and yeah, that works great. Except every time you load from that link, it creates a new link to the web launcher if you deleted the old one. Some even have found a way to skip the launcher altogether to bypass creating a new icon, but then they run the risk of failure to load into an unpatched game. I've had plenty of people telling me that you can do this with other Nexon titles, but the reason I'm specifically telling you all of this here, it's because the standard web launcher usually doesn't work. That's Nexon quality! Nexon, with its painfully insistent security measures, won't just take your login and password as enough to get into the game, as your first trip will have you set up a secondary password that can only be entered with an on-screen keyboard. After setting it up, you'll have to enter it every login. And if you forget the secondary password, you can only reset it, never recover it. Once finally in, you can choose between a few servers. Those looking for myself or Trigger, we play exclusively on Ruari. Each server has several channels that you can travel to at any time, and we usually hang around on Channel 4. Oddly enough, Ruari was also the server that I had chosen with my original characters back in 2008. Why did I choose to start a new account instead of playing with my existing characters? I'll get into that. There are three races to choose from. Humans, the jacks of all trades with the slowest movement speed. The elves, skilled for archery and intelligence with the fastest movement speed. And the giants, hulking yet very human-looking enormities, mostly skilled for melee and defensive combat. When I say huge, I mean it. The 10-year-old giants are larger than the game's tallest, oldest humans. Humans can even ride on giants, which comes across as kind of degrading, doesn't it? While they look like they move the slowest, they're actually a bit faster than humans. There are restrictions to some of the races, as giants cannot become archers, and they're pretty bad at using magic for having a low base intelligence stat. Character creation is both simple and involved. For starters, you're limited to a very small set of appearance features. Some hairstyles and colors, eye types and eye colors, which oddly affect your starting outfit's colors, mouth types, and that's about it. Many of these are limited to being purchased with Pon, a currency with a few uses that you can purchase with Nexon's NX Cash. Originally, you needed premium cards to create characters with these extra features, and that ran into its own problems. Again, later. You'll also notice that you have a choice of gender, which is cosmetic save for choices in cosmetic outfits. What is not cosmetic is your age, however, starting as low as 10 and as high as the ripe old anime age of 17. You gain starting stats and level up stats depending entirely on what age you start with. Want higher intelligence and mana? Go older. Want higher critical thanks to higher luck? Go younger. Basically, pick whatever age will give you the greatest gain in the stats that matter to you. There is more potential for overall AP gain the younger you start out, but that won't entirely matter since you are able to rebirth every day as a beginner. More on that later. The age you choose is not constant. In fact, every week, on Saturday specifically, you gain 1 year to your age and a stat boost to go along with it. As you get older, you'll get less and less boost to stats upon aging up, but once you hit 17, you stop aging physically. This all pertains to a whole other mechanic that I'll be talking about much later on. Controls in the game are more related to click-to-move controls. You can technically play the entire game with the mouse if you wanted. Click where you want to move to, click on the enemy you want to fight, click on the NPC to talk to them, click on the skill to use it. You can't jump at all, and while you can move with WASD, it was something implemented as an afterthought, and there's plenty of places where it will not work properly, as I've often found myself stuck trying to move through dungeons with it. Sometimes it's best to switch up WASD and click the move when you find that one method isn't working as well as the other. You can also, for the sake of convenience, assign your skills to a hotkey bar, which usually makes combat go a bit smoother. Once starting the game, you'll enter a white void and be greeted by the mistress of jiggle physics and goddess of Fortron's ecchi board named Now, who will explain most of the process of the game before you start. Oh, by the way, click the move is the only method that works here, for some reason. WASD does nothing in here, and here alone. Since reading things about a game when you don't really understand them yet isn't all that interesting, maybe just keep watching this episode, but Now should recap some of the things for you if you need a reminder. If you decide not to speak to her, she'll then ask you to choose from several talents, a fairly new system to the game. Originally, the game's sandbox approach was very sandbox, letting you learn whatever you wanted and whenever. While this still is very much true, the talent system lets you focus specifically on a certain set of skills, as it grants you bonus experience when using them, and training them specifically, as well as boosting stats that would help you most with that skill set. There's combat skills like close combat, magic, dual gun, and such, as well as life skills like adventure, cooking, and smithing. The game suggests you start out with one of 3 choices: martial arts, close combat, or ninja. Close combat being the original and most basic combat system in the game, and ninja being a lot of fun as long as you understand just how the game works first. I suggest starting out with close combat and switching it up later once you get the mechanics of the game down. And again, I'll eventually explain how that works. Now back when I did my SMT Imagine review, I kept making comparison to the game's combat as being very similar to Mabinogi's. I was later told that the system was changed and it's much more standard now. No, it's not. Okay, imagine for a second you're just playing a standard MMO. You go ahead and click on an enemy to attack it, what usually happens? You might have said, oh, you'll just start attacking it. But if you play a game that doesn't have kind of white damage or auto attack system, maybe you'll say, oh, well, you're targeting it, then you just click on one of the skills and you'll automatically attack it. Yeah, not in Mabinogi. If you're running into this game with that mindset, you'll wonder why your character is just standing there like a jackass. Oh, maybe there's no auto attack, you'll realize. Then you'll go to click on your skill. Now you have an icon over your head, and you're still standing around like a jackass. See, in Mabi, you need to click the enemy, then either click them again to attack, or click the skill, and then click them again to attack. And that might not even work, because suddenly you can't move, or you have a weird icon on your cursor and you can't click it off now. See, Mabi's combat is based entirely around timing. It's like this weird hybrid of an action-based system, a standard MMO combat system, and rock, paper, scissors. Certain attacks must be queued and used to counter other enemy attacks. Did you hit the enemy and now he's rushing towards you? Click on defense to weather the blow, or click on counterattack and wait for him to take a shot. Now the enemy is going defensive? Click on smash and head in to overpower his defenses. Enemy heading towards you with a smash attack? Use the counterattack stance, or hit him with a normal attack to get into the strike before he can. Now he's standing there in a counterattack stance? Move next to him and sweep him down with a windmill attack. And what I've just described to you is the most basic form of combat in Mabinogi. That's the easy way. I've not mentioned things like the percentage of hit counters for archery or charge building for magic users. In case you didn't guess, this gets a lot of people tossing up their hands in frustration yelling, "Nope, I'm done!" And for a while I was right there with you. Until it all made sense. And damn it, I was having fun with this. Now don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of wrong with it. The timing-based system means that anything from minor lag to a badly positioned camera angle could be the end of you and screw up your whole plan. Certain skill sets will have a serious amount of trouble dealing with anything more than 2 enemies at once, especially when dealing with ranged enemies as a melee user. Clicking on enemies is so pixel precise that if you're not just clicking directly on the sprite, you'll end up walking to it and then let it get in a good shot on you. Luckily, you can help alleviate this by holding control when your mouse is near an enemy sprite to automatically target that sprite. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be a way to change it from the control key to a less annoying key to press. Stats to worry about in combat are HP, mana, and stamina. HP, as always, is your health. Lose all of it and you die, forcing yourself to have to resurrect by heading back to the nearest town or on the spot while in the field. If you're in a dungeon, you can res by heading back to the nearest town, nearest goddess statue, or beginning of the dungeon. In both areas, you can also wait around for someone to res you, but other players will be unable to do so if you don't choose Wait for Rescue and have the feather icon above your body. You can also summon Now to revive you if you have the appropriate item. You might also notice that occasionally your HP bar won't restore itself back to full, showing up as a black bar instead of the normal dark purple. This is wound damage, taken by certain enemy attacks or repeated deaths. Wounds can only be repaired with a first aid skill, resting, as long as you're not in a dungeon, or just simply leveling up. Players can eventually get healing magic that can recover wound damage as well. Mana is simple enough now, and used for any kind of magic that you wield. Stamina is an across-the-board bar used for all your physically oriented attacks, regardless of type. Some attacks and weapons consume more stamina than others, and stamina does slowly recharge constantly, but can be restored faster with potions or rest. In the event you find your stamina bar not filling all the way in the same manner that HP takes wound damage, this would be due to your hunger, which is constantly and slowly draining, and is easily restored with any food item. Gaining levels for better stats might be all fine and dandy, but you won't really be getting anywhere progressively without using your AP to upgrade individual skills. After every level, and after certain quests, you gain an amount of AP, or ability points. These are spent specifically to upgrade your various skills, both passive and active. For example, close combat-focused players will get things like Combat Mastery and Sword Mastery as passives, but also Defense, Smash, Counterattack, and Windmill as active skills. When you perform certain tasks outlined in each skill, like use Smash to defeat an opponent or get a critical strike with a sword, you gain points towards that skill. When the bar is full, you can then upgrade that skill with your ability points. Lower rank skills cost 1 or 2 AP, while getting into higher ranks might cost you into the double digits for each rank. AP required depends entirely on the skill as well, as I've gotten decently high ranks in Light Armor Mastery and still only need 1 AP to upgrade it. Ranks start at rank F and go all the way up to rank 1. Basically, once you hit rank A, you'll next hit rank 9 and start counting down. While quests are pretty good at providing AP, you'll find the easiest way to gain AP, leveling, becomes slower and slower the higher up you go in level. There's a way around that. And that would be the most notable feature in Mabinogi, the rebirth system. Essentially, story-wise, your character is some form of immortal being, able to regress their level back to 1, even their age back to 10 if they so desire. What possible use could that have? Well, while you do lose all your levels and every stat boost that goes with being higher level, you keep every AP earned and every rank and every skill that you've upgraded. Even if you see a character that's a 10-year-old child and only level 1, they could very well be a complete capable badass with maxed out ninja stats. If you've been upgrading, you'll find that once you've rebirthed, you're still nearly every bit as combat capable as you were when you decided to reset your levels, and getting back to the level you were at will feel more and more like a breeze. You can even use rebirth to select a different talent to try out some of the other playstyles and life skills. As a beginner player, you can even rebirth once every 24 hours, and if you're an active player, there's seriously no reason not to. It's a ton of easy AP that you can get to improve yourself even faster. Originally, the rebirth system was a bit more complex, and not necessarily the fault of game mechanics. At the very beginning, rebirthing was restricted to once every 3 weeks, and could not be performed without purchasing a brand new character card, effectively making this a pay-to-progress game. 2 years in, rebirthing shifted to allow paying players to rebirth every 6 days with their said character cards, while free players could rebirth for free upon reaching age 20. Note that both of these systems either allowed or outright required the player to pay and unlock a character slot, which was then consumed when an already existing character was reborn. Hell, when I first started playing, due to a simple issue, the game wouldn't let me rebirth a character I had on a premium card unless I bought another premium card. That's Nexon quality! And now I'm starting to remember the original reason I quit this game. Through this AP upgrade system and rebirth mechanic, this means that your character can technically unlock and specialize in everything. There are race restrictions like the aforementioned giants can't be archers thing, but knowing this, it's a pretty damn cool feature, and a lot easier to pull off than in Age of Wushu. Loot is handled in a basic manner for a click to move. Defeat an enemy or open a chest, it drops on the ground. Click on it to pick it up, but again the same pixel-perfect clicking issue applies. This time you can hold Alt to highlight all the dropped gear on the ground and make it a bit easier to retrieve. The inventory, however, is a bit different. Think of the Diablo-style grid inventory, where some items take up as little as a 1x1 square, and larger items take up 6 or 8 squares in different shapes. Major downside is that you cannot rotate them, and they don't always follow logic. For example, some keys will take up a 1x1 square, others will take up a 2x1 vertical, sometimes there'll be a 2x1 horizontal, and sometimes it's a 2x2 square. It depends entirely on the key, even if they may perform vastly similar jobs. The game is nice enough to grant you a separate loot window for quest items and player-bound items under the Me tab, and you can also purchase bags that take up a decent amount of main inventory space, but trade off in granting you far more space. Veteran players often have a large amount of bags rather than any main inventory space. Keep in mind that gold is also something that takes up space, specifically a 1x1 square per stack of 1000, and that it accumulates fast. You can buy special gold bags that would let you store 10,000 gold in the space that 4,000 gold would normally take up. There's also bank NPCs that let you store a good amount of items and gold for a fee. Despite the game being very sandbox-oriented, there is a quest system in the game, but it doesn't act as if you're picking up quests randomly from characters with icons over their heads. For the most part, quests are granted to you automatically or after completing certain conditions. There are a few kinds of quests. Beginner quests, which will teach you the basics of the game. Normal quests, which will ask you to learn new skills, gather items, reach certain skill ranks, levels, and so forth. There's plenty of other quests known as mainstream quests that progress the story along. The first you'll likely see being the goddess quests that take you through the game's story, which frankly is quite fascinating if you're willing to pay attention to it. Later on, you'll find other quest chains, each ending with a full overarching story leading into a new chapter. Like, you get cutscenes and credits and everything. The beginner's experience was made far easier for players than it was in the beginning. New players, or at least those who create humans, will gain a potion that grants them 500 AP out of the gate, and also gain dozens of potions that'll increase the stats of specific talent skills. New players can rebirth for free every 24 hours, and gain free potions and resurrection stones each day. You get these bonuses until you reach a cumulative level of 1000. Think of all the levels that you've earned before your rebirth being put toward a counter, and you get the idea. Quests that were grindy or at least time-consuming have been made far simpler, as a story quest that originally had you killing 50 zombies, a number that was later reduced to 10, is now currently sitting at 1. I'm guessing that due to the sheer amount of content in the game now, they want to make sure that new players can get through the early stuff with a bit less effort. That's not to say that everything is a pushover. Let's just say that Glass Goblin has quite a few mechanics that don't make the fight all that simple, no matter how well leveled you think you are. What? I learned how to better pronounce it. You know that thing was traditionally a cow that gave infinite milk, right? At level 10, you'll be asked to go choose a homestead, which is like a personal crafting hub where you can do farming, smelting, and what have you, as long as you build the buildings for it. Performing more building tasks on the homestead grants you higher homestead levels and allows for even more land expansion. The game's dungeon systems, which for once I won't be moving to the community section, are actually very story-focused and randomly generated. Usually. To start any dungeon, you can head directly to the dungeon's goddess statue and drop an item. Pretty much any item to be transported inside. I say pretty much because there are specific items that will take you to specific versions of the dungeons. You might be given a ticket to enter the dungeon on a specific difficulty, or an item to take you to a very specific mission that will put you into the role of another character. All dungeons contain several rooms, and occasionally a few floors, where you must work your way to the end by either finding keys to open doors, hitting switches to open doors, where failure to hit the correct switch will cause enemies to spawn, or open chests which will spawn a wave or few of enemies, and finally finding the boss key and entering the boss room, where you'll face off against a boss and possibly several other enemies. Defeat everything in the room, open the final chest, and click on the statue to exit the dungeon. Later on, you'll find other instanced areas like shadow missions where the layout is fixed, but you'll have specific objectives to complete. You'll also come across theater missions where the layout is a very straightforward set of rooms, but each room contains a horde mode-like gauntlet of enemies and bosses that the player must defeat to move through. Those more into the life sim aspect than the kill things aspect might find more solace taking up some simple crafting jobs, and one way to gain rewards without standard questing is the part-time job feature. Most NPCs will have a few dialogue options when you choose to start conversation with them. One of these options is the part-time job. Unfortunately, these jobs are limited by the number of people that can apply for them, and they're only available at specific times in the in-game day. You can check what time each part-time job starts by looking at the sign near the NPC. You might also notice that the signs are very needlessly explaining the positioning of shadows when referring to the time. This is because, at least in the Korean beta, the game didn't have an in-game clock that you could just check. However, since the clock was patched in well before the US version was made, the fact that these descriptions are still left in makes them sound pretentious or patronizing, as if I'm not able to understand that when it's noon, the shadows would be underneath me. So when checking with a grocery store to see if they want to start taking jobs, you'll get some flowery BS like, when the sun is past the apex and the shadows point slightly to the southeast. Dude, I'm just asking you when you want me to grind you some wheat flour, not summon an ancient blood god. Fast travel is fairly important to getting around, especially when you start performing story quests, so be on the lookout for moon gates, which you can unlock simply by clicking on and making sure that they've been marked on your map. You can travel between the gates instantly by clicking on another, and there are many scattered around the world. If you make your way over to the new continent, these will be called mana tunnels, but have nearly the same effect. You'll also eventually unlock things like pets, which take up character slots and are accessed by pressing T. They can be summoned for a limited amount of time daily. All pets can fight alongside you, but many have other functions as well. Some are mounts, some retrieve loot for you, and some contain room-clearing spells. Most of these are going to be accessed in the cash shop, however. Overall, there are a lot of quirks, and likely many things I either glanced over or didn't mention at all. It'll take a while to really wrap your head around all of this, and these systems will likely be your biggest hurdle into whether or not you'll enjoy this game. I do encourage you to stick through it if you're the least bit intrigued, because sooner or later, it will click, and despite many frustrations, there's quite a bit to enjoy about this game. I've made clear my reservations over this game's fanbase. I've dealt with plenty of situations before where talking about any game with a vocal fanbase has led to plenty of undesirable results, even if my experiences in-game have been relatively pleasant. Well, this is another game where my in-game experiences were relatively pleasant, but to be fair, I had a stacked deck here. Having Trigger along, a well-known player of the game in his own right, did help alleviate a bit of the frustration. Players I found in-game were often very quiet and mostly friendly, even willing to offer help and giving tips and suggestions to better prepare me for upcoming quests and content. However, from what I've been told, this might depend entirely not only on what server you're on, but also what channel in said server. I've not spent too much time in Channel 1, as that channel is mostly staffed with shops and traders, as well as most of the types of players that would likely give you a headache. It's usually pretty busy and can kill your frame rate in cities like Dunbarton. Other channels had their own reputation. As Channel 2 seemed fairly neutral to anything, 3 and 4 contained role players of varying types, and everything 5 and below were, and still are, often empty. Lately, general server populations haven't upheld these reputations, but there does seem to be a decent presence on Channel 4 still, perhaps out of tradition. The process for making a guild isn't all that complex in Mabinogi, but it's quite quirky. First off, the guild leader must have either paid for premium or VIP service, putting a cash wall up immediately. They must purchase a guild deed for a simple 1,000 gold from Even in Dunbarton. Then construct a party with 5 guildless players in it. The leader of the party was the intended guild leader. The party leader can then use the guild deed and enter a name, which must be approved by the other 4 party members. After approval, the leader chooses a cosmetic guild type, like adventure, commercial, or social, then decides if they wish to accept new members, and finally places the guild stone, a monument that allows other players to apply for membership, into an open field, just in case you were wondering why there's all these oddly named obelisks that were scattered all over the field of Tir Chanal. I was spammed with a guild invite a few times, and many players in the game seem to have a guild for the sake of just having another name over their heads. While there are tons of guilds in the game, there's usually only a handful of major active guilds going on at any given time. I'd like to think that those guilds would be a bit more discerning about getting new members than tossing invites into new players' faces. You wouldn't think a game like this would even have something like a PvP system. After all, the combat is quite obviously made for a very specific kind of PvE playstyle. That didn't stop Nexon from trying to cash in on the WoW-centric faction warfare bandwagon by introducing a race-specific war between the elves and giants, and the humans who've chosen to ally with either side. Also tossed in rather haphazardly are PvP arenas, with various rule sets like Free-for-All and Albi Dungeon, Paladins vs Dark Knights and Robbie Dungeon, a guild vs guild arena as well as a section of the world with a weekly scheduled PvP event, and of course the tried and true dueling mechanic, which was so poorly implemented with the existing combat system that players started making up arbitrary rules to dueling, simply because the game's combat systems is based upon dealing damage and not taking it. These unwritten rules include no using HP potions, no using mana shield, no spamming stunlock skills like final hit, and what have you. As there was no official list of this anywhere, and it wasn't enforced in the game, this led to a lot of drama in the community anytime a player knowingly or ignorantly broke one of these rules. For the most part, though, the community spoke through action, and most of the game's PvP systems are now relegated to dark corners of the map. It's hardly a thing you'll find being actively participated in, save for maybe all that dueling on Channel 1. Ah, Nexon, you certainly love this place, don't you? Starting off, as I mentioned before, this game gives you a decent amount of character slots, or at least it does now. I got 6 creating a new account. Why did I create a new account? Well, my old account wasn't as generous. Despite getting a free card when elves were released, my old account had an astonishing 1 card on it. I paid for a premium to create Cyan, and the rebirth snafu made me not want to play all that much. So with 3 characters and no idea how to play anymore, and wishing to start fresh, why didn't I just delete a character to free up a card? Because the game won't let me. First, you have to wait 24 hours to delete, which is understandable with Nexon's many security issues and hacking problems. And when you delete a character, you don't simply get to overwrite the card. No, the card itself vanishes, and essentially you're deleting the character slot. Want to make a new character after deleting one? You have to buy a new card. That's Nexon quality! These cards don't run cheap either, costing the point equivalent of $6.30 for a basic Ace card. There's also hero cards which run $14.90, which can only be used once you reach a cumulative level of 1000, letting you start a new character with a 1k cumulative level, and some pre-ranked skills. Pay $19.90 and you can net an elite hero card, as long as you've reached a cumulative level of 2000 with another character, which of course creates that new character at 2000 and pre-ranks even more skills. Considering this is a game where you can create a character capable of learning everything, spending that much on a high-level character card seems misguided, unless you're really that impatient and a serious altaholic. Pets are also pretty popular cash shop items since, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot that they can do. Aspiring tailors looking for extra wool can get a sheep that they can shear that follows them around, and can cast ice magic. Want a puppy? A dragon? A flying food truck? It's all here for your purchasing pleasure. Some pets are always in the shop, while others are subject to limited availability, but fortunately none of them are rentals. When Nexon stopped using things like that ridiculous premium card crap for their cosmetic purchases, they decided to allow you to purchase cosmetic items separately. So when you're creating a character, you can choose the hairstyle you want and buy it outright, instead of having to buy something that just reveals a new menu selection. So you can just get some NX and do this, right? That's cute. I think you might be forgetting who we're dealing with. Instead, you might notice a few items in the game requiring something called Pawn, not to be confused with the Homestead experience called Con. Pawn is a set of points that you can purchase in bulk packs with NX. Then you can use those points to purchase things like new hairstyles, the hero talents, and niceties on your homestead. To put it in simpler terms, yo dog, I heard you like cash shop points, so we put cash shop points in the cash shop so you can buy points with your points! So, those hero talents you might have seen when Busty Chongsam asked you what you wanted as a talent, those are sort of a talent hybrid. Druids, for example, are essentially a combination of martial arts, magic, and medicine. Choosing and purchasing a hero talent will grant you some much higher stats per level up, and you'll get the training bonuses for all the skills that pertain to the regular talents that your hero talent combines. It's better for starting out than it is once you've built a really strong character. There's some cosmetic outfit sets that don't require pawn to purchase, and usually tying into recent events. Currently available are outfits from Sword Art Online, much to the dismay of Trigger, as Raid Call was met with groans of frustration every time we passed another Kirito. Other appearance-altering items come in the form of clothing dyes, and potions to adjust the appearance of age on yourself or your pet. Those potions will not work as a way to equip age-restricted clothing or allow you to get more free AP upon age up, and will only last until your next age up. Regardless of what you need, I highly advise that you use the cash shop on the Nexon webpage and try not to use it in the game, as the in-game version is more often than not broken. That's Nexon... You get it by now. I was wary about starting this, and I'm still a bit wary about how this will be received, but I'm really not upset by the fact that I gave Mabinogi a real look again. In fact, there have been times, and there are still times, that I end up wanting to go back into the game, work on raising my skills, and seeing more of the story as it progresses. I can honestly say that I can see myself playing this, just not religiously. There's really nothing on the market right now that's quite like it, unless you really want to stretch your thinking and count Age of Wushu. If you like having full control over your character progression and having so many options to choose from, and you don't mind some odd combat quirks, dated graphics and mechanics, or an ever-present Nexonian air of potential frustration, it might just be worth looking into Mabinogi. Here's my final rating. There really isn't anything on the market, at least anymore, that reminds me of Mabinogi. There was a reason I'd make constant reference to this game, as it was a game I really wanted to enjoy for that factor alone. Being able to create a character the way you want to create it, and being able to switch up your playstyle nearly on the fly is a great feature for those who just like building characters from the ground up. Despite the game's aesthetic, the story is fascinating if you're willing to actually pay attention to it, and there are plenty of twists, turns, and tragedies to keep you wondering what's going to happen in the next questline. It could be worth a look for that fact alone. While the starting 6 slots is pretty generous now, understand that if you delete a character or really want more than 6 characters, you're going to need a new slot after a while, and purchasing them is really the only way, even if I wouldn't advise shelling out the hefty fee for any of those hero cards. If you're not concerned with working on more than a few characters, consider nabbing a few pets, as they each have plenty of uses beyond their cosmetics. Speaking of cosmetic features, getting a few pawn is a better, albeit stranger, way of allowing a lot more customization than the limited facial and hairstyle choices will give you, and it'll definitely have a good number of uses down the line on your homestead or hero talents. An old game is going to have old game problems. Click to move is still a fairly annoying method of travel, especially when clicking to target is also involved. While the game has made vast improvements to streamline its convolution, there's still a lot of systems left in the game that remain needlessly complex for what you're trying to accomplish, especially with such a low payoff for that effort now. Let's just say there's a reason I didn't go too much into the life skills portion of the game. As a game designed primarily as a sandbox, it might come across as directionless for those who don't enjoy that style of gameplay, and while having many more choices to make than merely following a quest line is paradise to some who want to pick a set class and see the sights in sequential order might not have any reason to look into this game. Next time, I think I'll be taking up something a lot simpler, and something I had originally wrote off as a side quest only game before I'd heard it undergone some serious changes. Once starting the game, you'll enter a You'll enter a white void and be greeted by misty subjugal physics. I'm fine.